From New York and on the new Hot 97 app, Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Ebro in the morning, Rosenberg Radio. Laura Stiles?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't know why I said that like that, but I'm excited to have this conversation. We have Fawn Weaver and we have Kenny Burns in the building.
Hello, hello.
And they came bearing gifts with this beautiful bottle of whiskey.
Uncle Nearest 1856 premium whiskey. Now, normally when someone brings a product, we get the quick plug in and then we get to the other stuff. And Kenny, I do have some DC talk I want to have with you.
Oh, absolutely.
But I will say this actually interests me. That's totally legit. A, because whiskey is something I enjoy. I'm not a huge drinker. But
when you do,
when I do, I am a whiskey and bourbon guy. That's kind of what I enjoy. Nice. So I'd love for you guys to tell us the story. First of all, it looks and feels beautiful. Love packaging so important to me with booze.
Honestly, it really is. As soon as you gave me the bottle, I was like, wow, this will make a great gift.
Yo, this is such a little thing that I just noticed. I don't know how much time you spent on this.
Yeah.
The feel of the label makes it feel like this is a nice. This means something.
This means something.
So tell us what it does mean.
Well, this is the first whiskey ever to honor an African American, which, considering that African Americans essentially helped build the American whiskey business, that one has never been honored, is baffling. But a part of that is you can't really honor property. And I say that because when we were distilling, when we were really running the stills, we were not citizens, we were property. And so there was no way to credit. And so few people that helped to build this, do we even know their names? And so this is one story that refuses to die. It's literally come up probably about every decade, where it's the story of Nearest Green. And we were able to piece together that he is the first African-American master distiller known in America.
So Uncle Nearest is a person.
Uncle Nearest is an actual person. His name is Nathan, but everyone called him Nearest in the city of Lynchburg, Tennessee.
Which is where whiskey comes from, correct?
Well, I don't know. It's where Tennessee whiskey comes from.
Okay, so real quick before
that's a big thing. Tennessee whiskey.
Right. So before we get to the Uncle Nearest story, real quick, what are the differences between like Tennessee whiskey and bourbon? And
Great question.
What's the delineation? I get confused.
Hey, do you want to try to take that?
The charcoal mellowing process.
Yes.
Okay.
So there is only all whiskey, all bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon.
All bourbon is whiskey.
Did you learn something?
So whiskey is the big category.
Whiskey is the big category. Right. So you have your Scotch, your Irish whiskey, your Tennessee whiskey, and your bourbon all fall under whiskey. But the only way that you can be a Tennessee whiskey is you do one thing, which is charcoal mellowing, as Kenny said.
What is that?
So that's essentially taking sugar maple charcoal, so sugar maple trees, cutting them down, bring them into charcoal, and then that's what you run the whiskey through to pull out the impurities. So it's essentially, this is the best way to explain it is bourbon plus one. So it's bourbon plus this one extra step that takes about 14 additional days.
Okay.
So it makes it better than bourbon, and I think a lot of people don't know that.
Would that be would I would assume that would be a smoky flavor?
Yes, it depends. So most of the smoke dissipates after a while, after sitting in the barrel, so you don't really taste it. But in our premium silver, do we have that?
Yes,
somewhere?
we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
In our premium silver, we allow the smokiness to stay in it, so it ends up tasting a little bit like a smoky Scotch or a mezcal, which is cool.
That's interesting, because I always thought that the smokiness came from the barrels, the aging
It does.
process.
It
okay,
does.
So it does.
So the inside of the barrel are charred. So you're getting it from both. You're getting it from both. So we taste it after every single process. And we thought that the charcoal mellowing was just going to pull out and not add anything. And then we tasted and we're like, wait a minute, where's the smoke coming from?
Right.
And then we put it in the barrels and pulled it out. So it was actually a pleasant surprise for us, because none of us were expecting for the charcoal after that time frame doing that. So
okay, so back to Uncle Nearest.
Yeah.
So this is the guy who literally really created Jack Daniels?
No. He didn't create Jack Daniels.
He taught Jack Daniels.
Created Jack Daniel. However, he was Jack Daniels' teacher, his mentor, his friend. So Jack learned how to begin
let me guess,
making whiskey
Jack was
at young.
white.
Jack was definitely white.
Got it.
Jack's white, 5'2". He never grew over
Super
5'2", and good dude, really
But he was
good dude.
people like him.
The
very
whole
much
town
so.
was very close.
Very much so, including Nearest and Nearest's family.
Which a lot of the descendants still work at Jack Daniels.
To this day.
Yeah.
And now Uncle Nearest is a slave.
Yes, he was a slave. Yes.
But he wasn't a slave he wasn't a slave for Jack Daniels' family.
Absolutely not. Jack was a boy who lost his mom at a very early age. So he lost his mom at 4 months, right?
Wow.
So in the middle of 1848, you lose your mom. Your dad doesn't have any clue how to raise you. Back in those days, men just didn't know what to do.
Right.
And so, 4 months old, he loses. He's the 10th child, so he has to grow up really, really quickly. He goes around 8, 9 years old, goes and works at the same farm where Nearest was a slave and where Nearest was the master distiller on that farm. And he got interested in the whiskey business, and so the distiller who was renting Nearest, whole other story.
And it's hard to even get through a story when you have to stop with the person being rented. I know.
Whole other story. He was being rented because slaves at that time, I don't know if you guys know this, but slaves basically went for about $800. Well, if you're a skilled distiller, you're going for a lot more than that. And $800 was like 2 years worth of salary for a farmer at that time. So that was a lot of money to spend on and we have to remember we're talking about spending on a person.
Right.
And so what an owner would do is if no one would purchase because they were too expensive, they would just rent them instead.
Their skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Nearest was rented, but essentially
this little kid bonds with him.
And he and Jack are on the same farm. They're both working. So one was not above the other. They were both workers for the same man.
And how did it eventually, when did Nearest die?
We don't know. So this is the.
Did he make it past 1865? Was he freed?
So he was freed, and he was Jack's first master distiller. We know that he was the master distiller until at least 1881, where the first Jack Daniel distillery is located. So it's about 313 acres where Jack grew up, where Nearest taught Jack, where the original still, where the water still flows, and all the rest of that. We own that. So that 313 acre property and the home and the old still and all the rest of that stuff. And so, so that was
Who owns
until
that?
She owns it.
I
That's the crazy piece.
Okay, jump in, Kenny Barnes. Explain
that happen? She owns
Stop
the
it.
original
Stop it.
300 acres.
Yeah,
that
how
Jack
did that
Daniels.
happen?
Thank you, Laura. Great question. That is a great question.
So I show up in town to do research on the story. My husband is an EVP, an executive vice president for Sony Pictures. I, on the other side, am an entrepreneur, 23 years, but also an author. And I saw a story and I saw a movie. So I went to town to figure out, was there something more here than what little tidbit had been out? And I get there and doing the research, it's a tiny, tiny town. So I'll skip forward. Long story short, the eldest descendant still living of Jack's shows up where I'm doing research because somebody called her and said, there's someone here doing research on this story. And the thing is
get on down here and let's figure out what's going on.
The thing is, this is a small town. And up until that point, you had all these people starting to say the story had gotten out, right? And there wasn't a lot of facts, but people started saying Jack was Nearest's slave and that Jack stole the recipe from Nearest. So if you're that town and this is your legacy and your family, you don't want someone coming in there right?
Yeah. And honestly, I think I read that somewhere too.
Let's clear that up. Jack was a good dude, and he had a great relationship with Nearest and Nearest's boys. So and
eventually paid him to run. Once he was freed, paid him to run his distillery.
Not only was he paid to run his distillery, but he was the wealthiest African American in the area. He, his boys, his kids, his grandkids, his great-grandkids. You could go through Lynchburg, and I can point out all the land that they owned. It wasn't small. So no, he paid him like he was white.
How did you get to owning this property? How did we get
by the way, nice swerve.
All right, sorry. So we got off. Okay, so the descendant comes through and she's like, very nice, but she basically wants to know, what are we doing? What are we looking for? So she and I began to talk, and we bonded, and I told her, listen, I read Jack's biography, and in Jack's biography, which is only about this thick, it is not that big. We own the rights to that too. That's a different story. So It's only about this thick, and Nearest and his boys were mentioned 50 times in Jack's biography. That was written in 1965. So someone did not want this story to die. And when you start looking at who was being interviewed, it was everyone around Jack. It was his family. So why would they have mentioned this one person so many times that he threw out the entire book? And I realized that once I was talking to his descendant. And so I told her, I said, listen, I read the book. I don't think he was mentioned because Jack did anything wrong. I think he was mentioned because your entire family wanted to make sure he would not have been forgotten. And after that, she began just talking and sharing information and sharing, call this person, call that person. This is Jack's descendant. This is Nearest's descendant. They could help tell you the story. And then her last words were, that farm that Jack grew up with, that's in his biography that you read, it's for sale. You should buy it. So we did.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so
that's Jack's house on the bottle, by the way.
Yeah.
That's the house. That's his home on the land that.
Oh, right there. Wait. So you bought Jack's land?
So it did not belong to Jack. He was a farm boy for a preacher and a distiller.
This is the original land. Okay, got it. This is where him and Nearest met.
This is where they met. This is where he learned, and that home is where he grew up. But the home belonged to the preacher and the distiller.
So wait, what was still left on the land?
That's still left on the land.
The house?
People living in
Is that all? Just the house?
We bought it from people who were living there. No, so you still have that. You have the barn. You have 2 homes, actually. And the thing that's crazy is the same water that filled all of those bottles up until about 1884, that water still flows. It's never stopped. It's never stopped. So we could bottle it up even now and make a single barrel out of it, but we're not doing that, so nobody call and ask.
And you didn't make, and so how does the Uncle Nearest recipe or whatever fit into this product?
Yeah, so there's 2 different ones. So the premium silver and the aged. Now the aged is 9 years old. So obviously we began working on this a year and a half ago. So we purchase whiskey from a distiller in Tennessee who is phenomenal, and we then do our own process to it. So if you put us up against our source, if you will, you're going to taste a pretty distinct difference. And it's because we ship it on barrels out and we do our own process. The silver is a recipe that was saved from a fire in Lynchburg, and it was from the 19th century. That is what we use. It is the only whiskey on the market that uses corn malt. It is the only whiskey in the world that is triple charcoal mellowed and double distilled as well. So yeah, it's a legit brand.
What's the price point on this sucker?
So the aged is $59.99. So we compete with Blanton's, if you will.
Okay.
And the premium silver is $43.99. And that one we actually are competing in the premium vodka category.
Got you.
So even though it's a whiskey,
okay,
because it is a clear, it is the only first premium silver to ever hit the market. So you can actually drink it on the rocks. You can drink it neat, which that's never been done.
Make a martini.
Now, are any of Uncle Nearest's descendants involved in this company?
All of them. So it is never a day that goes by that I am not on the phone with them, texting back and forth with them, because we also have the Nearest Green Foundation. And this funds the Nearest Green Foundation. The Nearest Green Foundation puts every single one of Nearest's descendants that are of college age through college full ride. So we're taking care of them all over this country.
Is the Jack Daniels company involved in supporting the Nearest Green? That would be a step that could be nice.
Yeah, possibly. The thing, though, is...
Fawn.
Wait, they don't feel a certain way, do they?
They love Fawn. Fawn is a very active participant in educating people on Uncle Nearest and what has transpired over all these years, and they're very supportive of what we're doing.
Here's the deal: is this story is a story that is only authentic and genuine because they're not paying me to tell this story.
Right. Okay.
Right? So when I began doing the research, I didn't know what I was going to find, and I'm pleasantly surprised to know, Nearest wasn't Jack's slave, and yes, he did teach him, and yes, he was his first master distiller, and yes, they did have this amazing relationship of mentor and mentee and pupil and teacher, but no offense to anyone, a white person can't tell this story because there's too many stories of slaves that had really, you're a slave. And so a white person cannot then say, hey, and by the way, this slave was treated well. Okay.
No, you can't.
It was still a slave.
By the way, it's a really great point.
Yeah.
Because inherently, that being the lens to go through just makes you go,
absolutely,
I'm not comfortable with kind of hearing the conversation.
Right. So imagine if I am partnered with Jack Daniels and I'm telling this story, all of a sudden it's a marketing story versus it being a true story, and the story is 100% true. So we want to be able to keep that separation.
So where does this guy get involved?
This guy gets involved. Well, Kenny Burns. Take it away.
Kenny, where do you get involved?
No, I mean, obviously, I'm a legend in the spirit business. I mean, from creating the influencer programs that all spirit companies use to most recently with Puff and launching Apple Ciroc and De Leon. And for me, when I left Combs, it was more about obviously ownership and equity and things of that nature, reaching this plateau in my career. But then there was the story, right? So you have this amazing story of Uncle Nearest, right, Nathan Green. But then Fawn and her husband, like to, for a best-selling author to, be interested in the story, right, to go down, find out about the story, but then start meeting all these key pieces in history, and then the move she made. I mean, she's very,
How did you guys connect, Pierre? How did the original connection?
She's very responsible for the things she says, but I just wanted to say this part because the way that she strategically placed herself, it was just like, wow, I mean, you think reparations, you think all types of things for even all the people that never got their due. Like, how many people have worked so hard their entire career and didn't get their due? Mm-hmm. How many people have worked, their entirety and don't get any credit, right? Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things where I just connected. Then there was a raise being done, and the team that was doing the raise called me and was like, you got to meet this lady, Fawn Weaver. She's incredible. I'm telling you. And I had no idea who.
He's talking about a capital raise. We were doing a series of raise.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, doing a raise. So I, had no idea who I was going to meet. So literally.
But they knew you'd be a good fit because you're a history in the spirit business.
Absolutely. And they told Fawn the same. And we probably met a week or two later in Tennessee.
Yeah.
I walked the properties, felt, all the tingles and, feels that you could feel just being on the property where this house is and going through the, Lynchburg, Tennessee. I mean, my idea
it's a whole
of
thing.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. My idea of Lynchburg anything is like, oh, wait, everybody calm down. But then I get there and, she's taking me on this tour and teaching me about who he was and what he means to the city. And even, and she didn't mention this, even the relationships. I mean, she touched on it, how everybody was kind of connected. He was the highest paid, slave, whatever. But they all got along. They all existed together. They all ate in the same places. Like, it's a really big story that will eventually be a movie.
And not highest paid slaves. I want to clear that.
Yeah, I didn't even want to say the word. I don't like the word, but you get what I'm saying. They all.
After slavery is when he went to work for Jack Daniel, and he was paid well, and it wasn't just his family, even other African Americans that worked there. They were paid based on tenure, not paid based on race. And in a town called Lynchburg, that's pretty.
And
that's
is that why
remarkable.
is it called Lynchburg because of lynchings?
No, it's called. There's 3 different reasons,
That's what
and
I
no
thought
one.
too, Rose.
Yeah. No one really knows. Some say that it was named after Lynchburg, Virginia. Some say it was named after a judge. That last name Lynch, who helped it. I don't know.
Because being from D.C., I heard Lynchburg. I thought it was Virginia immediately. And it was like, no, Tennessee, and then the whole history behind it. But yeah.
What I will say is they did a lot of lynchings there, but it was lynchings of both whites and blacks. As far as they were concerned.
Good old even lynchings. Why I much prefer.
Even lynchings. No, it was that was their court system. Yeah. If they thought you were guilty, you got lynched. They wouldn't be bothered with a trial.
Wow.
So interesting.
Now, real quick, how much does when you go to Lynchburg? How much?
I live in Lynchburg, by the way.
Oh, you live there now.
So
she
we bought quite a bit of property down there
and decided to stay.
Mm-hmm.
So how much of it is constantly like Jack Daniel's land?
Oh,
how much does it, like when you go to Memphis, you feel FedEx. You know, like this is a much smaller. As soon as you land, you feel FedEx in Memphis. This is a very small place. So do you feel Jack Daniel's presence all the time?
Lynchburg
100%.
is Jack Daniel country. When you drive into the town, there's a big sign that says "Welcome to the Source," which makes me laugh because then whenever people come up to the original spring that's on our property, I go, "Welcome to the original source." Yeah. The source is source.
This is the source.
Yeah. So, but no, it's Jack Daniel country. So even when we decided where we were building out the Nearest Green Distillery, we already owned that 313 acres. We could have built there. We decided to build outside of town because we think that Jack earned Lynchburg, and Nearest should have his own.
Welcoming it though, do they see it as competition? Like how is it?
No, that community is unbelievable because they've always known the story. Right. They always knew the importance of Nearest. So to them, they're just kind of like, it's about damn time.
Oh, hold on. So it's her. That's why, because she came in properly.
Right.
She took the black cemetery, took away all the shrubbery, built a memorial for Uncle Nearest. Mm-hmm. I mean, just things in the community that mattered that no one came and did, not even the people that were there.
Well, yeah, and you're obviously just a good representative of the story. It's so important. Like, you're able to deliver the message. You're able to deliver a message which has painful parts to it.
Yeah.
And be honest about it.
Yeah.
While also telling what is ultimately a sort of a positive story within a really bad time.
So I'll tell you why I can do that is because I interviewed over 100 people for this, descendants of both Jack and Nearest, and every elder, African American, and by elder I mean like 75 and up, and there's a lot of them there, surprisingly, every single one that I would interview and say, when you talk about race relations when you were growing up, would you say it was like 60-40, 70-30, 80-20 in terms of negative to positive to negative? Every single one said 90-10. 90 positive, 10 negative. You're talking about people that are 70, 80, 90 years old, growing up in a town called Lynchburg,
Tennessee.
Right. And so
It
does, right?
Really
it doesn't sound real, but I've literally been there now for over 18 months, and I've interviewed so many different people. And I remember interviewing the fifth master distiller. Well, obviously, the master distiller list has changed since he was announced. He has now been announced as their first master distiller. And so it's changed, but I think Frank Bobo was master distiller previously number 5, so I think that makes him number 6 now. But anyhow,
historian.
So I was talking to him, and I was just talking to him about his time there and the African Americans that were under him. And he says, listen, I can tell you that I never saw race. I never saw them as any different, whether black or white. He said, but that's me. You'd have to ask them if they felt the same way.
Right.
And I love that he said that, because I was able to go back to him and say, so I asked all of the African Americans who worked for you who are still alive, that are all 80 plus years old.
Right.
And I got a chance to tell him, and they all confirmed that you never treated them differently than you treated the whites who worked there. And that's
that's a nice,
remarkable.
Especially considering
at that time.
And especially for where we live right now.
Exactly.
It's hard to even fathom stories of kindness.
Yes.
Because things feel so
especially
unkind
from
now.
that time.
Right. So if you
especially from
right.
that
So to
time.
think about a time where in the South, although we were talking about this yesterday, and this is a vastly different story, but you have to remember, even in these states that we consider, because my parents love taking trips to like all kinds of every random part of America. My parents love taking trips to, and they'll go and they'll find like the synagogue, and like they'll find the little Jewish area, and they'll go do the whatever African American history parts are there. That's just who they are. And they were explaining yesterday about one of the reasons they like it is that even in a state like Alabama, right, or Tennessee or Mississippi, they're really the places we think of as the most racist.
Yeah.
In the last election in those places, 40% would still be voting Democrat.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to remember, even in those pockets that we consider the worst, there are pockets of good in all those places. It's just about going to find those stories, because it's so easy, especially in the time we live in now, to just never think about that
100%.
stuff.
Well, and it's easier to tell a story that's negative, because the stories that are positive are nuanced, and no one wants nuance. Everyone wants 140 characters. Some stories like this one can't be told in 140 characters.
You come out because someone can find a clip like, look at this light-skinned lady telling her story about how Uncle Nearest was so happy as a slave.
Right.
People will do that.
And to be clear, I would never say he was happy as a slave. I have no idea.
Right.
What I will say is Jack was not his owner.
Right, and they had a good relationship.
And they had a good relationship.
But again, that's gray. That's actually listening.
Exactly.
That's actually telling the story and hearing the story.
It's more than 140 characters.
Well, I'll tell you what. It's a nice story for this.
It is.
I'm going to try this weekend. I look forward to it.
Yes.
Good.
Uncle Nearest 1856. It's out right now.
It is out now in New York. It will get here next month. It is out in 12 states. We will be in 42 by the end of the year. So, but right now, we're about a month out from New York.
Very cool. Guys, thank you. Kenny, I was gonna do a whole DC thing with you. We'll do that at a separate time, because I didn't know how deep we were gonna go into
I was trying to
This was
tell
a
you.
great story, especially because I told you that I had read, and it's so funny because I read the negative version of it.
Right. The untrue version of it.
Right. And randomly, I don't even remember where I saw it, but just kind of went through my timeline. I was like, oh, that's interesting.
And that's the reason we're doing this, because even like the trolls, right? Like you hear,
Yeah.
so what are the kids getting? Is the family involved? I need to know. And absolutely 100%. So
I love that. And for more information, do you guys have a website?
UncleNearest.com.
Dope.
So
UncleNearest.com.
spell it right though. NEAREST. UncleNearest.com.
Guys,
thank you guys.
Thank you so much for making time.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.